2 days before my son's wedding, the bride's mother moved into my house like she already owned the place, and my son, he actually helped her carry her stuff in. That night, they demanded everything. The next morning, I left, and I locked the door behind me. They had to climb out the window just to make it to their own wedding. I was holding my coffee mug with both hands when the silver sedan rolled into my driveway. It was a quiet Tuesday morning in our peaceful neighborhood just outside Chicago, 2 days before my son's wedding. I'd been expecting the florist, but when the passenger door swung open, out stepped Vivian, the mother of my future daughter-in-law, Brooke. My son Ryan popped the trunk and started hauling out 3 enormous suitcases. I didn't feel anger, just a cool, crystal-clear calm. I opened the front door before they could even ring the bell and gave them my politest, most distant smile, the one I usually save for people I barely know. Ryan, Brooke, Vivian. What a surprise, I said softly. Brooke immediately launched into her story about a burst pipe flooding Vivian's apartment back in Sally, New York, practically shoving her mother into my foyer like she'd won some kind of prize. I didn't step aside. I stayed right where I was, forcing them to pause for a second. Of course Vivian can stay. It's an emergency, I said, meeting Ryan's shifty gaze. I didn't lift a finger to help with the bags, while Ryan grunted and wrestled the heavy suitcases up the stairs to the guest room. I headed straight to the kitchen. With a slow, almost ceremonial motion, I took the bowl of spare keys that had hung on the hook for years and slipped it into my apron pocket. Vivian followed me in and started opening my cabinets like she was doing inventory. We're going to need to make some serious space here, Helen. I require structure for my daily routines, she announced, bossy as ever. I watched her shove my tea tins aside. I didn't argue. Instead, I picked up my most expensive porcelain teapot and carried it silently into my bedroom. When I came back, she was already reorganizing my coffee supply. I've already prepared the rooms, I said gently. The guest room is all set. I've locked the other upstairs rooms because that's where I keep the fragile family heirlooms. They need to stay safe with all the wedding chaos going on. Vivian froze. She caught the quiet message her territory had limits, but she had no idea I was already carrying every important key in the house right in my pocket. The next morning, I woke to the clatter of metal in the kitchen. Vivian had decided to whip up a big fancy breakfast for Brooke before the final fitting. When I walked in, the counter was covered in flour and eggshells, a mess that hurt to look at in my usually spotless kitchen. Good morning, Helen. We're definitely going to need more fridge space. I tossed your old jams. They didn't look fresh anymore, she said without even glancing at me. My fingers trembled just a little, but my voice stayed steady. That's a shame, Vivian. Those were handmade gifts from dear friends. I opened the fridge, took out what was left of my own special treats, and packed them into a small wicker basket. Since you need the room for your special wedding diet, I'll just keep my things in my room, I said with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Ryan walked in looking relieved that I seemed so agreeable. Thanks, Mom. You're being really understanding. He didn't notice me quietly unplugging the fancy coffee maker and tucking it under my arm as I passed. The machine needs a deep descaling today. Sorry, it's out of commission. I lied sweetly. Brooke looked annoyed. But we need coffee. There's instant in the top cabinet, the kind Ryan used to like, I answered. I saw Vivian's face twist. Convenience was the first thing I took away. While they battled sticky dough in the kitchen, I slipped into the hallway, picked up Ryan's spare house key from the console table and replaced it with an old, worthless key from a junked basement lock. It looked identical, but would never turn the front door. I moved like a ghost, quietly stripping away the tools of their takeover while letting them think. They'd won. The house still looked orderly, but it was no longer the kind of order they could use against me. Every move I made was precise. Vivian thought she'd conquered the kitchen, but she'd only occupied a room I'd already made useless to her. Around lunchtime, the little group gathered at the dining table, which was buried under wedding magazines and fabric swatches. Brooke spread out a list of final bills like it was official business. Helen, we have a little issue with the florist. He needs the deposit for the church decorations in cash this afternoon. Ryan doesn't have any on him. Could you spot us? It's only $800, she said with her sweetest smile. Ryan looked at me expectantly, almost demanding. In the past, I would have reached for my wallet to keep the peace. Today, I just laid my hands flat on the dark wood of the table. That's a lot of money, I said calmly. I reviewed my expenses for the quarter last night. With extra guests in the house now, water and electric bills are going to jump. I have to protect my savings for the house. Brooke stared at me like I'd started speaking another language. But it's for the wedding. You always said you'd support us with whatever we needed. I am supporting you, Brooke, by giving you a roof over your heads. That's my main contribution to your new start, I replied with a softness that left no room for argument. Vivian jumped in. Helen, don't be so stingy. You've got plenty put away. I looked her straight in the eye without blinking. Exactly, because I've been careful, I do have that security. Ryan, you're about to be a married man. It's time you handled these financial details on your own. I stood up and walked to my computer in the living room. While they argued loudly in the kitchen, I logged into my online banking and canceled the scheduled payment for the luxury catering I'd planned as a surprise. The money went right back into my savings. They'd called me cheap fine. I'd play the part. I didn't argue or explain. I simply removed the financial foundation their arrogance rested on. Ryan's desperate phone call with the bank in the hallway became the soundtrack while I quietly sipped my afternoon tea. The wall around my money was now just as solid as the one around my privacy. Late that afternoon, Ryan knocked on my bedroom door, looking frantic, a single bead of sweat running down his temple. Mom, Brooke needs to get to her final fitting and Vivian has to pick up the wine crates for tomorrow. My car's packed with decorations. We really need yours. Can I have the keys? He held out his hand like it was my job to hand them over. I didn't make up an excuse. I stated a simple fact. The car's already spoken for Ryan. I loaned it to Mrs. Bennett across the street for her weekly grocery run. She doesn't drive anymore and really depends on the help. Ryan stammered in disbelief. Mrs. Bennett? But we need it for the wedding? This is an emergency? I take neighborhood help very seriously, I said calmly, especially now that I see how important mutual consideration is inside the house. Of course, I hadn't actually loaned it. I'd parked it 2 blocks away in a rented garage the day before with the key safely in my little wall safe. You could take the bus. The stop's only 5 minutes away. It's better for the environment too, and it'll give you time to rethink your plans. Brooke stormed in her face, flushed red. The bus in my wedding dress? That's ridiculous, Helen. You're doing this on purpose to mess with us. I looked at her with a mix of pity and ice. I'm simply protecting my own priorities. If you needed transportation, you should have asked me ahead of time instead of assuming it was automatic. Vivian ranted in the background about my sudden nastiness, but I ignored it like wind in the trees. I went out to the garden and started pruning my roses with sharp shears. In the end, they had to call an expensive cab. I watched from the corner of my eye as they climbed in grumpy as could be. Every little inconvenience I created was a direct answer to their lack of respect. I never outright refused them anything. I just made it impossible for them to treat my things like their own. Ryan looked at me through the cab window, and for the first time, I saw real doubt in his eyes. He was starting to understand that the gentle mom he knew had been replaced by a woman who knew her worth and her boundaries. While they were gone, I savored the heavenly quiet in my house. I knew Vivian had planned some kind of pre-wedding reception for her closest friends in my living room that evening. She'd already talked about rearranging my furniture for a buffet. I acted with surgical precision. I moved the most valuable rugs and antique side tables into my locked office, then flipped the breaker that controlled the living room outlets. When they came back loaded with bags of appetizers and champagne, it didn't take long for the complaints to start. Helen, the lights in the living room don't work. And where did the tables go? Vivian stood bewildered in the dark, nearly empty room. I came in from the kitchen holding a single lit candle, the flame dancing across my face. Looks like there's an issue with the old wiring in that part of the house, I said calmly. I already called the electrician, but he can't come until after the weekend. We'll have to be very careful with the power tonight, Brooke nearly screamed in frustration. But Vivian's friends are coming in an hour. We can't make them sit on the floor in the dark. True, that would be terribly rude, I agreed quietly. Maybe it would be best to move the reception to a nice cafe in town on short notice. They've got lights, music, and plenty of space. Vivian was livid, but powerless. She couldn't force me to fix wiring I claimed was broken. Ryan tried desperately to check the lights, but without the key to the locked breaker box, he got nowhere. In the end, they sat in the dim kitchen eating appetizers off paper plates, because I'd also locked away the good crystal. I don't want my family heirlooms getting damaged in all this commotion, I'd explained simply. They felt like unwelcome strangers in a house that was supposed to be open to them. I offered no help. I just retreated to my brightly lit bedroom with a book and my own hidden battery lantern. The boundary was now physical. My side was warm and bright. Theirs was cold, dark, and uncomfortable. The night before the wedding, the house was filled with a thick, icy silence. Vivian and Brooke barely spoke to me anymore. Their glares were full of barely hidden venom. Ryan looked like a shadow caught between two worlds, unable to pick a side. He kept trying to calm Brooke, who was on the verge of a breakdown because her perfect plans were collapsing like a house of cards. Meanwhile, I prepared for my final move with quiet determination. I packed a small, inconspicuous bag with my important documents, medications, and valuables. I wasn't sad, I was completely resolved to take control of my life again. Around midnight, once the house finally fell into restless sleep, I walked through the downstairs one last time. I checked every window to make sure it was locked tight, collected the remaining house keys from the hooks, and sat down at the empty kitchen table. I wrote a short note on a plain sheet of paper. No accusations, no emotional outbursts, just the bare facts. I placed it right on top of the elaborate wedding planner Brooke had left lying around. Then I went upstairs and quietly locked the heavy oak door that led to the hallway and guest rooms. I'd oiled the hinges that afternoon so there wasn't a sound. They weren't trapped in any dangerous way. There was an old servant's staircase down to the laundry room, but it was a dusty, awkward, and deeply humiliating path for a bride on her wedding morning. I left the house at exactly 4 a.m. through the garage. I'd already packed my car discreetly the night before. As I started the engine and the garage door closed softly behind me, I felt an incredible, almost youthful lightness. I wasn't the wicked mother-in-law from the stories, I was a woman reclaiming her peace. I drove north to a lovely little hotel on the lake I'd booked days earlier under a different name. I turned off my phone and tucked it into the dark glove compartment. Back in my house, 3 people were left thinking they could control me. Now they'd learned that a house without its soul is just cold, indifferent walls. The occupation was over before the celebration could even begin. I sat on the sunny terrace of the little hotel, looking out at the calm, deep blue water, holding a cup of hot, freshly brewed coffee. Real coffee, not cheap instant. At exactly 8 a.m., I turned my phone back on, curious about the fallout. It took less than a minute for the first message to arrive. It was from Ryan, pure panic in every word. "Mom, where in the world are you? We can't get down the hallway. The coffee maker is gone, and the heat isn't working. Brooke is screaming. Please call me right now." I read it and set the phone down calmly. I felt no pity, just confirmation that my plan had worked. 10 minutes later, another text came, this time from Vivian. Her tone had lost all its bossiness and sounded almost frantic. "Helen, what is this insanity? We have the ceremony today. We can't find the car keys and the whole house feels cursed. Come back and stop this game." I typed a short, matter-of-fact reply. "Check the kitchen table if you can get there. Everything you need to know is there. I'm enjoying a well-deserved vacation starting now. Good luck with your big day." On that table lay my note, laying out the truth without sugarcoating. Since Vivian is now running the household, and Brooke is making the rules, I've decided to treat myself to a nice long break. I canceled the catering and the reception venue tonight to cover my unexpected extra costs. The keys you're looking for are safely with me. Ryan, that spare key on your ring fits the lock, but won't turn the deadbolt, a little symbol of how you lost your backbone these past few days. You wanted independence and control. Now you have it in its purest form. Good luck solving your problems. I could picture the absolute chaos: Brooke without her fancy buffet, Vivian without her showpiece living room for photos, and Ryan without his mother's financial safety net. They were finally facing the full consequences of their arrogance. They'd made their bed out of disrespect, and now they had to lie in it while I enjoyed the fresh lake breeze. The wedding did happen, but it was nothing like the glamorous event Brooke had dreamed of. From what my neighbor Mrs. Bennett quietly told me later. They had to call an expensive van taxi to the courthouse because Ryan's car was jammed with decorations and they never found mine. Brooke's dress had been ironed in the dark chaos and now had ugly wrinkles. Vivian looked pale, tense, and suddenly older in the few phone photos I eventually saw. Because I'd canceled the upscale catering in time, there was no elegant reception with champagne and delicate appetizers. The guests stood confused outside the locked banquet hall until Ryan desperately tried to get a table for everyone at the local casual steakhouse. They ended up with simple grilled chicken and lukewarm beer instead of lobster and fine wine. Many guests were annoyed by the poor planning and the obvious absence of the groom's mother. And they left early. It wasn't a celebration of love. It was a strained, almost embarrassing attempt to keep up appearances under the worst conditions. Ryan tried calling me all evening, but I ignored every ring. I didn't want to hear the whiny voice of a son who only felt sorry once his own comfort was gone. He had stood by while Vivian rearranged my things, and Brooke openly insulted me. He had sold his loyalty for household peace, and now the bill had come due. I spent the afternoon on a long, freeing walk along the quiet lakeshore. The salty air seemed to wash away the last traces of motherly guilt. Late that night, I checked the final messages. Wild insults from Brooke and angry threats from Vivian. They blamed me for ruining their lives. But the truth was, I had simply held up a mirror to their own behavior. I had shown them that hospitality is a gift, not an entitlement. I slept deeper that night than I had in years, while my house stood empty and my conscience was perfectly clear. Exactly 2 weeks later, I returned. I had already made sure Ryan and Brooke had moved into their small rental apartment on the edge of town. Vivian had fled back to New York the moment she realized there would be no free maid service or luxury in my house anymore. The place was spotless. The professional cleaning crew I'd hired had done an excellent job. Every trace of Vivian's unwanted presence was gone. My tea tins were back in their proper order, and my cherished family photos hung untouched on the walls. Ryan stopped by a few days after I got back. He looked exhausted, almost broken. He sat at the same empty kitchen table where he had ignored me 2 weeks earlier to please Brooke. "Mom, I'm so incredibly sorry," he said quietly, avoiding my eyes. "I should never have let them treat you that way. Brooke and we just fight about money now. Vivian blames us for everything and wants compensation." I looked at him, but I felt no spark of pity or the old urge to comfort him. Real forgiveness is a long process. "Ryan, not a quick line at the kitchen table," I answered firmly. "You learned the hard way that mutual respect is the foundation of every relationship, including the one with your own mother." I didn't offer him coffee or put out any cookies. I wanted him to feel the difference from the old days. I was no longer the selfless caretaker who forgave everything. I was a woman with clear, non-negotiable boundaries. "You're always welcome here as a guest, Ryan." I continued looking out at my garden, but Vivian will never set foot in this house again. And Brooke will only be invited if she's ready to apologize to me sincerely and without excuses. Until that day comes, we'll live separate lives. He nodded slowly, heavily, as if he was finally feeling the weight of my words. He understood now that love is not permission to erase yourself. The months that followed were filled with peaceful quiet, and my life settled back into the shape I wanted. Ryan and Brooke actually divorced before their first anniversary was up. It turned out their so-called love had been tied tightly to my financial help and the promise of an easy inheritance. Without the big house and the safety net, Ryan wasn't appealing enough to Brooke anymore. Vivian disappeared completely from my world after I had her remaining things delivered to her by courier. I never heard another word from her, and that silence felt like the deepest peace I could imagine. Ryan and I are back in regular contact now, but on an entirely new level. He visits about once a month for a few hours. He usually brings flowers and politely asks if he can make himself a coffee instead of assuming. It's there for him. He lives in a small apartment in the city and works hard for his own living. We don't talk much about the disastrous wedding, but we do talk about the future and his plans. He respects my boundaries completely now without question, because he learned from painful experience that I defend them with consistent actions, not just empty words. He finally understands that a mother is not a convenient piece of furniture you can move around whenever it suits you. I've completely redecorated the inside of my house, not the way Vivian bossily demanded, but exactly the way I like it. The rooms feel brighter with plenty of space for my new hobbies and interests. I've started growing rare, delicate roses in the garden that need careful attention just like relationships do. Sometimes I stand at the kitchen window and remember that silver car pulling into the driveway. I feel no resentment anymore, only a deep, quiet satisfaction. I've learned you don't have to yell or get aggressive to be heard. You just have to know where the key to your own life is hidden and have the courage to use it. My house is no longer a hotel for the ungrateful. It's a safe home for a woman who knows her worth. When I slide the heavy deadbolt on the front door each evening, I do it with pure joy in my own order. I breathe in the fresh, cool night air and smile into the darkness. It's never too late to take full control of your life. You just have to find the courage to take that first step or simply lock the door at the right moment. When you stop giving other people the power to decide for you, everything falls back into its rightful place.